A blind artisan regained her sight thanks to a mysterious millionaire who paid for her surgery. When the bandages were removed, she burst into tears, recognizing her brother who had been lost for decades. Family secrets came to light, and their lives changed forever in ways no one could predict. A story of reunion, overcoming, and unconditional love that spans generations. Get ready, because this story will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment where you are watching from. The morning light filtered through the windows of Sea and Clay, a small pottery shop nestled in the heart of Bayshore, a charming coastal town in Maine. Inside, Sarah Mitchell's fingers moved skillfully over the wet clay, shaping it into a delicate vase. At 45, Sarah had learned to rely exclusively on her sense of touch after losing her sight in a car accident 3 years ago. Though the doctors had told her she would never see again, she had refused to let blindness define her. "Mom, I brought you some fresh coffee," said Emma, Sarah's 17-year-old daughter, placing the mug carefully into her mother's hand. "Thank you, sweetheart," Sarah smiled, her unseeing eyes directed toward the sound of her daughter's voice. "How's the shop looking today?" Emma glanced around at the shelves filled with Sarah's creations, bowls, vases, and figurines that customers often couldn't believe were made by someone who couldn't see. "Beautiful as always." Mrs. Patterson called to say she's picking up her commissioned centerpiece today. Sarah nodded, her fingers continuing to shape the clay. "And how's the college application coming along?" Emma hesitated before answering. "I submitted to Boston University last night, but Mom, the tuition is—" "We'll figure it out," Sarah interrupted, her voice firm with the determination that had carried them through the difficult years since the accident. "Your dream of becoming a doctor isn't going to be stopped by money concerns." The bell above the door jingled, announcing a customer. Emma squeezed her mother's shoulder gently before moving to greet whoever had entered. "Welcome to Sea and Clay," she said cheerfully. "Thank you," replied a deep, pleasant voice that carried the confidence of someone accustomed to authority. "I was walking along the boardwalk and couldn't help noticing your window display." Sarah listened to the footsteps, expensive shoes by the sound of them, as the stranger moved around the shop. There was something about his voice that stirred a distant memory, but she couldn't place it. "These pieces are extraordinary," the man said, genuine admiration in his tone. "Who's the artist?" "My mother," Emma replied with pride. "She makes everything here." "I'd love to meet her," the man said. Emma led the visitor to Sarah's workspace. "Mom, this is Robert Anderson," the man supplied, stepping forward. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Mitchell." "Ms.," Sarah corrected with a smile, wiping her hands on a towel before extending one. "But please, call me Sarah." Robert's hand enveloped hers in a firm handshake. "The craftsmanship of your work is remarkable." "Thank you," Sarah replied. "I'm afraid I have to rely on my daughter to describe how they look these days." There was a moment of silence, and Sarah could sense the visitor's surprise. "My mother lost her sight 3 years ago," Emma explained quietly. "She creates everything by touch now." "That's incredible," Robert said, and Sarah could hear the genuine awe in his voice. "I've never seen such precision and beauty in pottery, even from artists with perfect vision." Over the next hour, Robert Anderson stayed in the shop, asking questions about Sarah's techniques and the inspiration behind different pieces. Sarah found herself enjoying his company, his questions thoughtful rather than pitying or awkwardly, curious as many people's were when they learned of her condition. "What brings you to Bayshore, Mr. Anderson?" Sarah asked as Emma prepared to close the shop for lunch. "Please call me Robert," he insisted. "I'm here on business. My company is considering developing a luxury resort along the coastline, just north of town." Emma's intake of breath was audible. "The North Point area? But that's where all the local artists set up during the summer festival." "Is it?" Robert sounded genuinely interested. "I'd like to hear more about that. Perhaps over lunch? I'd be honored if you both would join." "Me?" Against her better judgment, Sarah found herself agreeing. There was something compelling about this stranger, a kindness beneath the obvious wealth and power. At the Lobster Pot, Bayshore's finest seafood restaurant, Robert continued to surprise Sarah with his genuine interest in the town and its artistic community. He asked Emma about her plans for the future, and when she hesitantly mentioned her dream of medical school, he immediately engaged her in a conversation about the latest medical advancements. "Actually," he said, "I serve on the board of a foundation that funds medical research and education. We're always looking for promising students to support." "That's very kind," Sarah interjected, her maternal instincts flaring protectively. "But Emma will earn her way through merit scholarships." "Of course," Robert said smoothly. "I didn't mean to overstep." As lunch concluded, Robert's phone rang. After a brief conversation, he sighed. "I apologize, but I have to cut this short. Business calls." "We understand," Sarah said, standing to leave. "Before I go," Robert said, his voice taking on a new tone of intensity, "I'd like to mention something. The foundation I'm involved with also funds medical research in vision restoration. There's a new experimental procedure at Mass General in Boston that's showing remarkable success rates for cases similar to yours." Sarah stiffened. "I've made peace with my condition, Mr. Anderson." "I'm sure you have," he replied gently. "Your strength is evident in everything you do, but if there's a chance to restore what was lost, wouldn't you want to take it?" After Robert left, Emma couldn't contain her excitement. "Mom, do you realize who that was? Robert Anderson of Anderson Enterprises. He's one of the richest men in the country, and he seemed really interested in your work." Sarah remained thoughtful, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. "He seems kind, but we've only just met him. People with that kind of money and power usually have agendas." "But what if he's genuine?" Emma persisted. "What if this surgery he mentioned could actually work? You could see again, Mom. You could see my graduation next year." Sarah reached across the table, finding her daughter's hand. The thought of seeing Emma's face again, of watching her walk across the stage in her cap and gown, made her heart ache with longing. But years of hard-won independence made her wary of accepting help, especially from a charismatic stranger whose motives she couldn't yet trust. As they walked home along the familiar boardwalk, the sounds of the ocean waves providing a soothing backdrop, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Robert Anderson's appearance in their lives marked the beginning of something significant, a turning point that would lead them down a path neither of them could predict. "We'll see," she finally said to Emma's continued enthusiasm about the surgery. "We'll see." The irony of her words wasn't lost on her, and a smile tugged at her lips as the sea breeze carried the promise of change on its salt-tinged breath. 3 weeks after their first meeting, Robert Anderson had become a regular visitor at Sea and Clay. Each time he arrived, he brought a small gift: rare glazes from Japan, specially crafted tools, or books on pottery that Emma would read aloud to Sarah in the evenings. Today he arrived as Sarah was teaching a weekend workshop for local children, guiding their small hands as they shaped simple clay bowls. "Your patience is remarkable," Robert commented, as the last child departed with proud parents and a misshapen but treasured creation. "You have a gift for teaching." Sarah smiled, wiping clay from her hands. "Children are naturally creative. They just need someone to believe in them." Emma emerged from the back room where she'd been packaging orders for shipping. "Mr. Anderson, I didn't know you were stopping by today. I have some news I wanted to share in person," he replied, his voice charged with excitement. "I've spoken with Dr. Eleanor Wright at Massachusetts General. She's the leading surgeon for the procedure I mentioned, and she's reviewed your medical records." Sarah stiffened. "How did you get my medical records?" There was an uncomfortable pause before Robert answered. "I asked Emma for your doctor's contact information. I hope you don't mind. I wanted to see if you might be a candidate before getting your hopes up." Sarah turned toward her daughter's direction, her expression a mixture of hurt and surprise. "Emma." "I'm sorry, Mom." Emma's voice trembled slightly. I had to know if there was a real chance." Sarah took a deep breath, tamping down her initial flare of anger. Emma's intentions were good, even if her actions overstepped boundaries. "And what did this doctor say?" "She believes you're an excellent candidate for the procedure," Robert said, his excitement returning. "Your optic nerve damage isn't as severe as originally diagnosed. With the new stem cell therapy they've developed, there's a 70% chance of significant vision restoration. The shop fell silent, except for the distant sound of waves from the open window. Sarah's hands found the edge of her work table, gripping it tightly as the implications washed over her. For 3 years, she had built a new life in darkness, learning to navigate the world without sight. The possibility of change, of seeing again, was both exhilarating and terrifying. "The foundation I chair will cover all expenses," Robert continued softly. "Transportation, the procedure, rehabilitation, everything." "Why?" The question escaped Sarah's lips before she could stop it. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Robert was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried an emotion Sarah couldn't quite identify. "When I first saw your work, I was moved in a way I can't explain. There's something familiar about your artistic vision. I've built my fortune by trusting my instincts, and my instincts are telling me this is important. Not just for you, but somehow for me too." "Mum," Emma said gently, "at least meet with the doctor. She's willing to come here to Bayshore next week to discuss everything in person." Later that evening, after Robert had gone, Sarah sat on the small porch of their cottage, listening to the rhythm of the waves. Emma joined her, setting a cup of tea on the small table between their chairs. "I am sorry about the medical records," Emma said quietly. "I should have asked you first." Sarah reached out, finding her daughter's hand. "You've had to be strong for too long, taking care of me when I should be taking care of you." "We take care of each other," Emma replied fiercely. "That's what family does." Family. The word stirred something in Sarah's memory, a childhood spent with a brother she hadn't seen since she was 7 years old. After their parents' bitter divorce, her father had taken her brother James and disappeared, cutting all contact. Despite years of searching, she had never found any trace of him. "I keep thinking about Mr. Anderson's offer," Emma continued, interrupting Sarah's thoughts. "If the surgery works, you could see my graduation. You could see me walk across the stage." Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand. "That would be worth everything." The following week, Dr. Eleanor Wright arrived in Bayshore as promised. The meeting took place in Sarah's living room, with Robert and Emma present. Dr. Wright explained the procedure in detail, how specially cultivated stem cells would be used to repair the damaged optic nerve tissue, followed by a series of treatments to stimulate neural regeneration. "The recovery will take time," Dr. Wright cautioned. "We'll remove the bandages after 2 weeks, but your vision will be blurry at first. It could take several months for your brain to relearn how to process visual information properly." "And the risks?" Sarah asked. "There's a small risk of infection, as with any surgery," Dr. Wright answered honestly. "The procedure itself has been performed successfully 37 times now. In those cases where vision wasn't restored, there were no negative effects. The patients remained at their previous level of vision." After Dr. Wright left, promising to send additional information, Sarah asked for some time alone. She walked slowly to the beach, her white cane tapping along the familiar path. The sounds and smells of the ocean had become her guiding stars in the darkness. The rushing waves, the call of seagulls, the salt-tinged air that changed subtly with the tides and seasons. What would it be like to see these things again? To watch the sunset paint the water in colors she could now only remember. To see Emma's face, no longer the 14-year-old girl from before the accident, but the young woman she had become. When she returned home, her decision was made. "I'll do it," she told Emma and Robert, who had waited anxiously for her return. "If there's even a chance I could see again, I have to try." 2 weeks later, Sarah found herself in Boston, in a private hospital room provided by Robert's foundation. Emma stayed by her side throughout the preoperative procedures, her constant presence a comfort against the growing anxiety. "Mr. Anderson is here," a nurse announced the morning of the surgery. "He'd like to wish you well before they take you." Now Robert entered, his footsteps familiar to Sarah now. "I brought you something," he said, placing a small object in her hands. Sarah's fingers explored the gift, a small clay figure of a woman standing tall, her arms outstretched as if embracing the world. "It reminded me of you," Robert explained. facing the unknown with courage. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, unexpectedly moved, "for everything." As the orderlies arrived to take her to surgery, Sarah reached for Emma's hand. "No matter what happens, remember that I've already been blessed with the greatest gift, you." Emma kissed her mother's cheek, her tears falling onto Sarah's skin. "I'll be right here when you wake up." The last thing Sarah heard before the anesthesia took effect was Robert's voice, speaking softly to Emma. "She's going to be fine. She's stronger than she knows." In her dreams during surgery, Sarah found herself walking through a foggy landscape that gradually cleared to reveal a beach from her childhood. A small boy ran ahead of her, laughing, his face turned away. "Come on, Sarah," he called. "Catch me if you can." The boy turned, and for an instant, Sarah thought she recognized his features, features that now belonged to a man she had only recently met. The dream faded as she slowly regained consciousness, the steady beep of hospital monitors bringing her back to reality. The darkness remained, but now it was the darkness of bandages wrapped around her eyes, and the promise of light waited just beyond. "Are you ready, Ms. Mitchell?" Dr. Wright's voice was gentle but tinged with excitement. 2 weeks had passed since the surgery, 2 weeks of darkness and anticipation, of Emma reading aloud from Sarah's favorite books to pass the hours, of Robert visiting daily with updates on the pottery shop being temporarily managed by Sarah's assistant. "As ready as I'll ever be," Sarah replied, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. Emma stood on one side of her hospital bed, gripping her mother's hand, while Robert stood at the foot of the bed, uncharacteristically silent. The room was dimly lit, a precaution to protect Sarah's eyes from sudden brightness. Dr. Wright began unwinding the bandages slowly, layer by layer, until only the gauze pads remained over Sarah's eyes. "Remember," the doctor cautioned, "your vision will be very blurry at first. Don't be discouraged. We'll take this one step at a time." Sarah nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs. The final pads were removed, and Dr. Wright instructed, "Keep your eyes closed for a moment. Now, very slowly, try to open them." Sarah's eyelids fluttered. Light, painful and overwhelming, seeped through her lashes. She squinted against the sensation, so foreign after years of darkness. "That's it," Dr. Wright encouraged. "Take your time." Gradually, Sarah's eyes adjusted. Blurry shapes emerged from the light, the white coat of the doctor, the pale blue walls of the hospital room, and the dark silhouette of her daughter. "Emma," she whispered, reaching toward the figure. "Mom!" Emma stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. To Sarah, her daughter's features were indistinct, like viewing her through frosted glass, but unmistakably there. "I can see you," Sarah said in wonder, her own tears flowing freely now. "You're so beautiful." Emma embraced her mother, both of them sobbing with joy. Dr. Wright discreetly wiped her own eyes, accustomed to such moments but never immune to their power. "Robert?" Sarah called, suddenly remembering their benefactor. "Are you still here?" "I'm here," he said, stepping closer to the bed. Sarah blinked, trying to bring his face into focus. As his features slowly sharpened, the square jaw, the slight crease, between his brows, the distinctive shape of his eyes, Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "What is it?" Emma asked, alarmed. "Mom, are you okay?" Sarah couldn't answer. She was staring at Robert's face, a face that mirrored one from her earliest memories, her brother James at 7 years old, the last time she had seen him. The resemblance was unmistakable, impossible, and yet undeniable. "Ms. Mitchell?" Dr. Wright moved forward, concerned. "Are you experiencing any pain or discomfort?" "No," Sarah managed to say, her voice barely audible. "I'm fine, just overwhelmed." Robert looked puzzled by her reaction but smiled warmly. "This is just the beginning, Sarah. Your vision will improve every day." Sarah nodded mechanically, her mind spinning with questions. Could this successful businessman really be her long-lost brother? The timing fit. He was approximately the right age. but James's last name had been Mitchell, like hers, not Anderson. And surely if Robert were James, he would have recognized her name, would have said something. Over the following days, as Sarah remained in the hospital for observation, she studied Robert's face whenever he visited, searching for confirmation of her suspicions. She didn't share her thoughts with Emma, not wanting to raise hopes that might be dashed if she was mistaken. One afternoon, while Emma was at the hospital cafeteria, Sarah found herself alone with Robert. "You've been quiet since the bandages came off," he observed, settling into the chair beside her bed. "Is everything all right?" Sarah hesitated, then decided on an indirect approach. "I'm curious about something. You've been so generous to us, but you've never mentioned your own family. Do you have siblings?" A shadow crossed Robert's face. "No, I was an only child." Disappointment washed over Sarah. She had been so certain. "Actually," Robert continued, his voice taking on a different tone, "that's not entirely true. I was adopted when I was 8 years old by the Andersons. Before that..." He trailed off, his expression distant. "My early childhood is something of a blank. There was an accident, at least that's what I was told. My birth parents were victims of a car crash. I have very few memories from before the adoption." Sarah's heart began to race. "Do you remember anything at all about your birth family?" Robert's brow furrowed in concentration. "Fragments, a house near water, a woman singing, and a little girl..." He stopped suddenly, looking at Sarah with new intensity. "Why are you asking these questions?" Before Sarah could respond, Emma returned, ending their private conversation. But the seed had been planted, and Sarah knew she needed to learn more. Back in their hotel room that evening, Sarah used her still blurry vision to navigate her laptop, searching for information about Robert Anderson's background. News articles described him as a self-made billionaire who had built Anderson Enterprises from a small tech startup into a global corporation. His philanthropic foundation focused on medical research and supporting the arts, particularly in small communities. None of the articles mentioned adoption or his early life, focusing instead on his business acumen and charitable work. Sarah would need to dig deeper. The next morning, when Emma left to pick up some essentials at a nearby pharmacy, Sarah called the one person who might have answers, her mother's oldest friend Judith, who had remained in contact with Sarah's mother until her passing 10 years ago. "Sarah, honey, how wonderful to hear from you. Emma told me about the surgery. Is it true? Can you really see again?" "It's true, Judith," Sarah confirmed, "but I'm calling about something else. Do you remember anything about what happened to James after the divorce? Any rumors about where Dad took him?" The line was quiet for a moment. "Why are you asking about this now after all these years?" "Please, Judith, it's important." Judith sighed heavily. "Your mother didn't want to burden you with this. After your father took James, there was an accident about a year later. Your father's car went off the road during a storm. He didn't survive." Sarah's grip on the phone tightened. "And James?" "The report said James was in the car too, but they never found..." Judith paused, clearly uncomfortable. "His body was never recovered. The authorities presumed he was also lost." "But he could have survived," Sarah pressed. "If there was..." "No body." "Sarah, honey, it was a terrible accident. The car went into a river during a flood. Your mother hired private investigators, but after months of searching, even she had to accept the truth." Judith's voice softened. "Is this about that businessman who's helping you? Emma mentioned him." "Maybe," Sarah admitted. "He looks exactly like James would look now. And he was adopted around the same time, after supposedly losing his parents. In an accident." "Oh, Sarah." Judith's tone was a mixture of concern and compassion. "I understand why you'd want to believe this, but please be careful. Don't build up a fantasy that might not be true." After ending the call, Sarah sat in silence, processing what she'd learned. If Judith was right, James had been presumed gone when he was just 8 years old, the same age Robert said he was adopted. The coincidence was too profound to ignore. That evening, a soft knock on the hotel door interrupted Sarah's thoughts. Emma opened it to find Robert standing there, holding a small gift-wrapped box. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. But I wanted to give Sarah something before I leave for New York tomorrow. Sarah gestured for him to enter. You're never an intrusion, Robert. He handed her the box. It's a token of celebration for the success of your surgery. Inside was an exquisite silver necklace with a pendant, 2 intertwined circles studded with tiny sapphires. It's beautiful, Sarah said, genuinely touched. The design reminded me of something, Robert explained, though I can't quite place what. Perhaps a dream. Sarah held the pendant closer to her improving eyes. The design triggered a memory, a pair of matching friendship bracelets she and James had made as children, with 2 interlocking circles meant to represent their unbreakable bond. Robert, she began, her voice shaking slightly, have you ever considered trying to find out more about your birth family? He looked surprised by the question. Over the years, yes, but my adoptive parents discouraged it. He hesitated. They weren't the warmest people, very focused on appearance and legacy. They made it clear that my previous life was something to be forgotten, not explored. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing she was about to take an enormous risk. What if I told you I might know something about your past, about who you were before you became Robert Anderson? His expression shifted from surprise to wariness. What are you talking about? Mom? Emma interjected, confusion evident on her face. What's going on? Sarah reached for a small photo album she had asked Emma to bring from home. With trembling fingers, she opened it to a faded photograph protected by a plastic sleeve, a picture of 2 children standing on a beach, arms around each other, their matching gap-toothed smiles beaming at the camera. This is me when I was 7, Sarah said softly, pointing to the little girl in the photo. And this, she continued, her finger moving to the slightly taller boy beside her, is my brother James Mitchell. We were separated when our parents divorced. My father took James away, and a year later, they were reportedly in a car accident. My father didn't survive, and James was presumed lost, though his body was never found. Robert stared at the photograph, his face unnaturally pale. What are you suggesting? Look at the boy in this picture, Robert. Really look at him. And then look in the mirror. Emma gasped as understanding dawned. Mom, you think Mr. Anderson is... I think he's my brother, Sarah said quietly. I think you're James Mitchell. Robert stared at the photograph, his expression unreadable. The silence in the hotel room stretched until it became almost unbearable. This is, he finally said, his voice strained. This is absurd. You think I'm your long-lost brother because of an old photograph? Because of some vague resemblance? Sarah's hope faltered at his sharp tone. Not just the resemblance, the timing fits perfectly. Do you have any idea how offensive this is? Robert cut her off, rising from his chair. I funded your surgery out of genuine concern, and this is how you repay me, by constructing some bizarre fantasy about us being siblings. Emma stepped forward, her protective instincts flaring. My mother wouldn't make something like this up. Just look at the photo again, please. Robert's jaw tightened. I'm sorry, but this conversation is over. I have a flight to catch in the morning. He moved toward the door, then paused. I'll have my assistant arrange for your continued care and rehabilitation. I wish you all the best, Ms. Mitchell. The formal address stung Sarah more than his anger. Robert, please. But he was already gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Emma turned to her mother, confusion and concern etched on her face. Mom, are you absolutely sure about this? Sarah sank back onto the edge of the bed, the photograph still in her trembling hands. I was so certain, she whispered. When I first saw his face clearly, it was like looking at a ghost from my past. Maybe he just needs time, Emma suggested, sitting beside her mother. It's a lot to process. Later that night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She replayed the confrontation in her mind, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. Perhaps Judith was right. Perhaps she had been so eager to find her brother that she'd projected her hopes onto a kind stranger. At dawn, Sarah received a text message from Robert. I've arranged for Dr. Wright to oversee your follow-up care. All expenses covered as promised. I wish you well. The brevity and formality of the message confirmed what Sarah already knew. Robert wanted nothing more to do with them. 3 days later, Sarah and Emma returned to Bayshore. News of Sarah's restored vision had spread through the small town, bringing a steady stream of well-wishers to the cottage. Sarah smiled and thanked them, but inside she felt hollow. The miracle of regained sight was overshadowed by the pain of Robert's rejection and her own doubts about what she thought she had discovered. "You should be celebrating," Emma said one evening, finding her mother staring at the old photograph. "Again. You can see again, Mom. Isn't that what matters most?" Sarah looked up at her daughter, grateful that her vision had improved enough to make out Emma's features clearly. "Of course it is," she assured her. "I'm just processing everything." The truth was more complicated. In the weeks following their return, Sarah had continued her research into Robert's background, using her newly restored sight to spend hours online. She discovered that Robert had indeed been adopted by Harold and Margaret Anderson, a wealthy couple from Connecticut who had no biological children. The adoption had been finalized in November 1985, just 3 months after the car accident that supposedly claimed the lives of Sarah's father and brother. Too many coincidences to ignore, yet not enough evidence to convince Robert himself. One morning in late August, as Sarah was preparing the shop for its reopening, the bell above the door jingled. Looking up, she was startled to see an elegantly dressed woman in her early 40s standing in the entrance, surveying the space with critical eyes. "Can I help you?" Sarah asked, setting aside the vase she'd been positioning. "Sarah Mitchell?" the woman inquired, her voice cultured and slightly cold. "Yes, that's me." The woman stepped forward, extending a manicured hand. "Victoria Harrington, Robert Anderson's ex-wife." Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she shook Victoria's hand. "I wasn't expecting—" "No, I imagine not," Victoria interrupted, moving around the shop with deliberate steps. "Robert doesn't know I'm here. In fact, we haven't spoken directly in months. Divorce tends to have that effect." "I'm not sure I understand why you've come," Sarah said cautiously. Victoria picked up a small clay figurine, one of Sarah's favorites, depicting a child looking out to sea. "Talented work," she commented. "I can see why Robert was fascinated." She set the piece down and fixed Sarah with a penetrating gaze. "He came back from Maine a changed man, distracted, troubled. When I inquired, his assistant mentioned your name, Mrs. Harrington." "Miss Harrington, please. I've reclaimed my independence along with my maiden name." She smiled thinly. "I'm here because I'm curious about the woman who managed to unsettle my ex-husband so thoroughly." Robert is not easily shaken. Something in Victoria's tone made Sarah wary. "We had a misunderstanding, that's all." "About him being your long-lost brother?" Victoria asked bluntly. Sarah stared at her, speechless. "Oh yes, I know all about that," Victoria continued, satisfaction evident in her expression. "Robert may not confide in me anymore, but he still trusts his lawyer, who happens to be a dear old friend from college. Pillow talk can be so informative." "I may have been mistaken," Sarah admitted, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Victoria laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "That's the fascinating part. You weren't." The shop seemed to tilt around Sarah. "What did you say?" "During our divorce proceedings 3 years ago, I hired a private investigator to look into Robert's past. Standard procedure when fighting. Over $1 billion settlement. The investigator discovered that Robert Anderson was born James Mitchell." Victoria's perfectly painted lips curved into a smile. "I kept that information in reserve, as leverage. Never needed to use it, as it turned out. Robert was surprisingly generous in the settlement." Sarah gripped the edge of the counter for support. "If you knew this, why didn't you tell him?" "What would be the advantage in that?" Victoria asked, genuinely puzzled. "Information is power, Ms. Mitchell. You don't give it away for free." "He deserves to know the truth about who he is," Sarah insisted. Victoria waved a dismissive hand. "Perhaps, but now that you've already tried to tell him and he's rejected the idea so thoroughly, he's unlikely to believe it coming from me." Sarah studied the woman before her, trying to understand her motives. "Why are you telling me this now?" Victoria's expression hardened. Because Robert is trying to reconcile with me. He's vulnerable, questioning everything after your little revelation. I don't want him finding his way back to you and this. She gestured around the shop. Quaint little life you've built. Robert belongs in my world, the world of influence and power. You don't love him, Sarah realized. You just want to control him. Love is overrated, Victoria replied coolly. What Robert and I had was mutually beneficial. He provided wealth and status. I provided the perfect corporate wife and social connections, until he became obsessed with his philanthropic projects and neglected our arrangement. Sarah straightened, a new strength flowing through her. I think you should leave. Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly. Not going to thank me for confirming your suspicions? Thank you for the confirmation. Now please leave my shop. With a last calculating look, Victoria turned to go, then paused at the door. One more thing you should know. The foundation that funded your surgery? It was established after Robert witnessed a blind woman being helped by her teenage daughter at a crosswalk in Boston 5 years ago. He was so moved that he created an entire foundation dedicated to vision restoration. She smiled at Sarah's shocked expression. Yes, Ms. Mitchell. That blind woman was you during your early days of blindness. Robert didn't recognize you when he walked into your shop because he never saw your face that day. But something in him remembered. Fascinating, isn't it? How fate works. After Victoria left, Sarah sank onto a nearby stool, overwhelmed. Everything she had suspected was true. Robert was indeed her brother James, and their paths had crossed even before he walked into her shop. But he had rejected the truth so vehemently that she didn't know if he would ever accept it. That evening, Emma returned from her summer job at the local library to find Sarah working feverishly at her pottery wheel, surrounded by newly crafted pieces. "Mom, what's going on?" Emma asked, taking in the unusual number of works in progress. Sarah looked up, her eyes bright with purpose. "The annual Coastal Arts Festival is next month. I've been invited to be the featured artist." Emma smiled, relieved to see her mother's passion reignited. "That's wonderful, but what brought this on?" Sarah gestured to a special piece drying on a nearby shelf, a sculpture of two children standing back to back, their hands linked at their sides. The facial features were unmistakably those of a young Sarah and James. "I had a visitor today," Sarah explained, wiping clay from her hands. "Robert's ex-wife. She confirmed everything, Emma. Robert is James." Emma's eyes widened. "Did she tell him?" "No. And he wouldn't believe her now, even if she did." Sarah gazed at the sculpture. "But I'm not giving up. Art has always been my way of expressing truth. If Robert attends the festival as the resort developer he claims to be, he'll see this piece, and perhaps somewhere in his subconscious, he'll remember." The next few weeks passed in a blur of creativity and preparation. News of the festival spread beyond Bayshore to neighboring coastal towns, and even to Boston art circles. Sarah's story, the blind potter who regained her sight and was now creating more powerful work than ever, generated media interest that ensured the event would be well attended. A week before the festival, Emma burst into the studio, waving her phone. "Mum, I just got an email acceptance from Boston University's pre-med program with a partial scholarship." Sarah embraced her daughter, joy momentarily displacing her preoccupation with Robert. "I'm so proud of you, but partial scholarship means we still need to find the rest of the tuition." Emma's excitement dimmed slightly. "I know, I've been calculating, and even with my savings and the scholarship, we're still short by about $30,000 per year." Sarah squeezed Emma's shoulders. "We'll figure it out. Maybe I can get a loan, or you could—" "I could defer for a year," Emma suggested. "Work full-time, save more money." "Absolutely not," Sarah said firmly. "Your education comes first. Always." Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed, Sarah sat at her small desk poring over their finances. The truth was stark. Even with increased sales from her pottery, they couldn't afford Boston University. Sarah's medical bills from before the surgery had depleted their savings, and the cottage mortgage still had years to go. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her brother was one of the wealthiest men in the country, yet her daughter might have to postpone her dreams because of financial constraints. Not that Sarah would ever ask Robert for money. Her pride wouldn't allow it, even if he were willing to listen. As she closed her laptop in defeat, a text message appeared on her phone from an unknown number, the sculpture of the two children. "How did you know about the sunset?" The message was signed simply R. Sarah stared at the message, her heart racing. She hadn't included a sunset in the sculpture. What was Robert talking about? Then she remembered, in the original photograph, of her and James as children. They had been standing on the beach at sunset, the orange glow highlighting their profiles. She had based the sculpture on that image, but focused on the figures, not the background. With trembling fingers, Sarah replied, "I wasn't trying to recreate the sunset. I was recreating a memory, our memory." The three dots indicating Robert was typing appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, a message came through. "I've been having dreams, a beach, two children, a promise to always find each other." Sarah pressed her hand to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. James and she had indeed made such a promise the day before. Their parents separated them. "It wasn't a dream, James," she typed back. "It was real. We were real." The response took several agonizing minutes. "I need more proof. Not just coincidences and old photographs. If what you're saying is true, it changes everything." "Come to the festival," Sarah wrote. "I'll bring everything I have. After that, you can decide what to believe." The reply was brief. "I'll be there." Sarah set down her phone, hope and anxiety warring within her. Robert was willing to listen, at least. But would the evidence she had be enough to convince him? And if he did accept the truth, what then? Would he want a relationship with the sister he hadn't known for nearly 4 decades? Or would the revelation simply be too much for him to integrate into his carefully constructed life? As dawn broke over Bayshore, painting the ocean in shades of gold and pink, Sarah stood at her window, watching the sunrise. For the first time in years, she could truly see its beauty, both with her restored physical vision and with the clarity that comes from finding purpose. Whatever happened with Robert at the festival, she would face it with the same resilience that had carried her through blindness and beyond. The pieces of her broken past were finally coming together, forming a new mosaic, more beautiful and complex than she could have imagined. The day of the Coastal Arts Festival dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect late summer day that brought tourists flocking to Bayshore's picturesque waterfront. Colorful tents lined the boardwalk, showcasing the work of artists from across New England. At the center of it all stood Sarah's exhibition, a spacious pavilion displaying not only her newest creations, but a retrospective of her work before and after losing her sight. "Everything looks amazing, Mom," Emma said, adjusting the position of a particularly striking vase. "Your pre-blindness work is beautiful, but what you created while blind has this incredible emotional quality. And now..." She gestured to the newest pieces, including the sculpture of the two children. "It's like you've combined both strengths." Sarah smiled at her daughter, reminded again of how fortunate she was. "Having been in darkness makes you appreciate the light all the more," she said softly. Throughout the morning, a steady stream of visitors filled the pavilion, many of them locals who had supported Sarah's shop for years. Dr. Wright made a surprise appearance, delighted to see her patient thriving. Even Judith had driven up from Boston to celebrate Sarah's success, but there was no sign of Robert. By mid-afternoon, Sarah's hope began to fade. Perhaps he had changed his mind. Perhaps Victoria had somehow intervened. The festival would close at sunset, just a few hours away. "He'll come," Emma reassured her, noticing her mother's frequent glances toward the entrance. "He promised." At 4 o'clock, a commotion near the boardwalk entrance caught their attention. A sleek black town car had pulled up, and a familiar figure emerged. Robert Anderson, dressed casually in khakis and a light blue shirt, rather than his usual business attire. He spoke briefly to his driver, then made his way through the crowd toward Sarah's pavilion. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched him approach. His expression was guarded, his posture tense. "Sarah," he greeted her with a formal nod. "Your exhibition is impressive." "Thank you for coming," she replied, conscious of Emma hovering protectively nearby. "Would you like a tour of the pieces?" Robert hesitated, then nodded. "Please." Sarah led him through the exhibition, explaining the evolution of her work, from her early traditional pottery to the more tactile, emotionally resonant pieces created during her blindness, to her newest works that combined visual precision with emotional depth. Robert listened attentively, occasionally asking thoughtful questions about her techniques or inspiration. Finally, they stood before the sculpture of the two children. "This is what you mentioned in your text," Sarah said, quietly. "The children on the beach." Robert studied the piece, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "The girl's profile. It's the same as yours." "Yes," Sarah confirmed, "and the boy's profile is the same as yours. Because it's us, Robert. James and Sarah Mitchell, the day before our parents separated us." Robert ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of uncertainty that struck Sarah as achingly familiar. Their father had done the same when troubled. "You mentioned you had more." "Proof?" he said, his voice carefully neutral. Sarah nodded. "In my studio, away from the crowd." She led Robert and Emma to the small room at the back of the pavilion that festival organizers had provided for artists to take breaks or store supplies. From her bag, Sarah withdrew a folder containing everything she had gathered: the original, photograph, birth certificates for both Sarah and James Mitchell, newspaper clippings about their father's accident, adoption records she had managed to obtain showing that an 8-year-old boy named James had been adopted by the Andersons just months after the accident. Robert examined each document methodically, his businessman's mind assessing the evidence. "This is compelling," he admitted finally, "but not conclusive." "There's one more thing," Sarah said, reaching into her pocket. "Something I've kept all these years." She opened her palm to reveal a small, worn wooden pendant carved in the palm shape of two overlapping circles. One edge was jagged as if it had been broken. Robert stared at it, transfixed. Slowly, he reached into his own pocket and withdrew a keychain. Attached to it was a fragment of wood, also in the shape of a circle, its edge jagged in a way that perfectly complemented Sarah's piece. With trembling hands, he brought the two pieces together. They fit perfectly, forming a complete pendant of two interlocking circles. "The day before Dad took you away," Sarah whispered, "we made these together. We broke it in half and promised that when we saw each other again, we'd put it back together. You said, 'Even if we're apart, we're still connected,'" Robert finished, his voice barely audible. "I said that." Emma gasped softly, witnessing the moment of recognition. Robert looked up, his eyes meeting Sarah's, filled with a mixture of wonder and pain. "All these years I've kept this without knowing why. My adoptive father wanted to throw it away, just a piece of broken wood," he said, "but I hid it. I couldn't bear to part with it." "Because somewhere inside you remembered," Sarah said gently. "Just as you remembered me at that crosswalk in Boston, even though you didn't know it was me." "Victoria told you about that?" Sarah nodded. "She came to the shop. She confirmed what the private investigator found during your divorce, that you were born James Mitchell." Robert's expression darkened. "She knew all this time?" "She was keeping it as leverage," Sarah explained. "But that's not important now. What matters is that you know the truth. You are my brother, James, the brother I've been searching for since I was 7 years old." Robert James closed his eyes, overwhelmed. When he opened them again, they shone with unshed tears. "I've always felt like something was missing. Even at the height of my success, there was this emptiness. I filled it with work, with philanthropy, but nothing ever quite fit. Until you walked into my shop," Sarah said. "Until something in you recognized something in me, even though neither of us understood it at the time." Suddenly, a commotion outside interrupted the moment. The pavilion door burst open, and a festival volunteer rushed in, her face flushed with panic. "Emma! There you are. We need you right away. A little boy fell into the water off the pier." Emma, who had trained as a lifeguard during high school, immediately sprang into action. I'm coming." Sarah and Robert followed as Emma raced toward the pier where a crowd had gathered. A frantic mother was being restrained from jumping in after her son, who was struggling in the water below, caught in a strong current that was pulling him away from shore. Without hesitation, Emma kicked off her shoes and dove into the water. The crowd watched anxiously as she swam powerfully toward the child, reached him, and began guiding him back toward the pier. But the current was stronger than anticipated, and Emma visibly struggled against it, making slow progress. Robert turned to a nearby festival security guard. "Do you have a rope? Anything we can throw to them?" The guard shook his head helplessly. "The rescue equipment is at the main beach, not here at the festival pier." Robert stripped off his shoes and shirt. "I was on the swimming team at Yale," he told Sarah, then dove in before she could respond. Sarah watched, her heart in her throat, as Robert swam out to Emma and the boy. Together, they managed to fight against the current, gradually making their way back to the pier. Willing hands reached down to pull the exhausted child up to safety, followed by Emma and finally Robert. The boy's mother enveloped her son in a tearful embrace, then turned to Emma and Robert. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you both so much." As the crowd dispersed and paramedics checked the child, Emma sat wrapped in a blanket, catching her breath. Robert sat beside her, similarly draped in a blanket provided by festival staff. "That was impressive," he told Emma. "You didn't hesitate for a second." Emma shrugged modestly. "I've been swimming these waters my whole life. I know how treacherous the currents can be." "You want to be a doctor?" Robert asked. "Yes," Emma confirmed. "I just got accepted to Boston University's pre-med program." Robert nodded thoughtfully. A noble profession. Sarah, who had been watching the interaction with a mixture of maternal pride and lingering anxiety, approached them. "Are you both okay?" "Fine, Mom," Emma assured her. "Just a little tired." "You raised a brave young woman," Robert told Sarah. Real admiration in his voice. "The bravest," Sarah agreed, squeezing Emma's shoulder. "Though I could have done without the heart attack of watching you both in that current." As they walked back toward the pavilion, Robert grew quiet, his expression contemplative. When they reached the studio room again, he turned to Sarah. "All those years ago, after the accident, I was told my family was gone. The Andersons presented the adoption as a fresh start, a new identity. They were stern people, successful but cold. They raised me to be ambitious, to focus on achievement above all else." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "When I saw that photograph you showed me, when you first suggested we might be siblings, I reacted badly because it threatened everything I thought I knew about myself." "I understand," Sarah said softly. "It was a shock. But these past few weeks I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. The dreams became more frequent. Memories, I realize now. And then today, seeing our pieces of the pendant fit together." He shook his head in wonder. "It's undeniable. You are my sister, Sarah, and I've missed out on 40 years of knowing you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "We've found each other now. That's what matters." Robert nodded, then turned to Emma. "And I have a niece I never knew existed. A niece who, it seems, has inherited the family courage." Emma smiled shyly. "So, should I call you Uncle Robert or Uncle James?" He considered the question seriously. "James was the boy I was born as, but Robert is the man I've become. I think both are part of me now." "How about just Uncle Rob?" Emma suggested pragmatically. A smile spread across his face, warm and genuine in a way Sarah hadn't seen before. "Uncle Rob it is." In the days that followed, Robert extended his stay in Bayshore, cancelling meetings and delegating tasks to his executives. He spent hours with Sarah, filling in the gaps of their separated lives, sharing stories of their very different journeys to adulthood. "I have something to tell you," Robert said one evening, as they sat on the porch of Sarah's cottage, watching the sunset. "I've been thinking about Emma's education." Sarah stiffened slightly. "We'll manage the tuition somehow." "I have no doubt," Robert agreed, "but as her uncle, I'd like to establish a trust for her education, not just for undergrad, but for medical school as well. She shouldn't have to worry about finances while pursuing her dreams. Sarah started to protest, but Robert held up a hand. This isn't charity, Sarah. It's family. If our situations were reversed, wouldn't you do the same for my child? Put. That way, Sarah couldn't argue. Thank you, she said simply. There's something else, Robert continued. The resort development I came here to oversee, I've been rethinking the project. Oh? Instead of a traditional luxury resort that would price out locals, I'm considering a different model. An arts center with a teaching hospital attached, specializing in vision disorders and rehabilitation. We could partner with Boston University's medical school, create internship opportunities for students like Emma. Sarah stared at him, astonished. That's an incredible vision. I thought you might approve, Robert said with a smile. And of course, we'd need an artist in residence to lead the pottery program for visually impaired patients. Are you offering me a job, little brother? Sarah teased. I'm offering you a partnership, Robert corrected. Your experience and talent combined with my resources. Together, we could create something meaningful. As they continued discussing the possibilities, Emma joined them on the porch carrying a small package. This just arrived for you, Mum. Sarah opened it to find a letter from a prestigious New York gallery offering her a solo exhibition the following spring. They saw my work at the festival, she explained to Robert and Emma, her voice full of wonder. They want to feature my journey from sight to blindness and back again, told through my art. Robert beamed with pride. The world deserves to see your work, Sarah. Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed, Sarah and Robert sat looking through an old photo album Sarah's mother had kept. Most of the photos were of Sarah alone or with her mother, but there were a precious few from before the divorce that showed both children together. I wish Mum could have known you found your way back to me, Sarah said softly. She never stopped. Hoping never stopped looking for you. Tell me about her, Robert requested. What was she like? As Sarah shared stories of their mother, her kindness, her resilience, her unwavering love, she felt a sense of completion she had never experienced before. The circle that had been broken so many years ago was whole again. Not perfect, not unmarked by the years of separation, but whole nonetheless. 1 year later, the Mitchell Center for Arts and Vision opened its doors on the northern shore of Bayshore. The state-of-the-art facility featured medical research labs, rehabilitation services, art studios, and a breathtaking gallery showcasing works by artists with visual impairments. At the center of the main lobby stood a bronze sculpture commissioned by Robert, a larger, more detailed version of Sarah's piece depicting the two children on the beach. Only now the children were joined by a third figure, a teenage girl with her hand resting protectively on the shoulder of the younger girl. On the day of the grand opening, as guests mingled and admired the facilities, Robert found Sarah standing before the sculpture, her eyes bright with tears. What do you think? He asked, joining her. It's perfect, she replied. 3 generations connected. Speaking of generations, Robert said, lowering his voice, have you told Emma about Victoria's latest communication? Sarah nodded. She's furious that Victoria is trying to contest your decision to redirect most of your estate to the foundation. Robert shrugged. Victoria made her choice years ago when she decided to use information as leverage instead of truth. Besides, the foundation is Emma's future too. She'll be running the medical side one day after she completes her residency. They were interrupted by the arrival of Emma herself, proudly wearing her Boston University sweatshirt. Uncle Rob? Mum? They're ready for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. As the 3 of them moved toward the entrance, where press and dignitaries waited, Robert squeezed Sarah's hand. When I walked into your shop that day, I was looking for an investment opportunity. Instead, I found my past, my present, and my future, all in one place. Sarah smiled up at her brother, at the face she had searched for in crowds for decades. Now familiar and beloved. We promised we'd find each other again, remember? Some promises are meant to be kept. Together they stepped forward into the sunlight, a family once fractured by circumstance, now made whole by fate, choice, and the enduring power of love.